Hello, everyone, and welcome to Reshaping Cybersecurity with Generative AI. Now, a word of warning here as we get started. I am terrible at saying the phrase generative AI. I don't know why exactly that is, but I struggle with it badly. So anyway, bear with me if that happens. I apologize. Anyway, today's webinar is sponsored by SentinelOne and produced by Actual Tech Media. And the one who has trouble saying generative AI is me, Keith Ward. I'm a moderator with Actual Tech Media, and I am delighted to be here with you today. Before we get to the content, though, there's some housekeeping items I do need to go over. The first is that we encourage any questions in the questions box right there in your webinar control panel, which should be on the right side of your screen. Now, although today's session is pre-recorded, SentinelOne will follow up with any questions that you have today. Now, that Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues. So if you can't see something, can't hear something, something goes wrong, give your browser a refresh first and then try another one and then hit us up if things are still going poorly for you, and we will hop on and try to help you out. Okay, next up, look at the handouts section. There's some awesome free resources in there, and that includes a link to getting started with SentinelOne. You'll also find a link there to the ATM Decisions Group, which is a panel of IT decision makers that participate in more in-depth events and other opportunities. You'll also see a link to the ATM Events Center, which has our calendar of more upcoming events like this one. Check those out, and if you see some you like, well, sign up after the event today. We got a whole bunch coming up in July and a lot more in August. And okay, third up, hey, you could win some cash today. At the end of the event, we are going to be giving away a $250 Amazon gift card to one of you. Now, you do have to be in attendance during the entire live event to qualify for the prize. No sneaking out early. So just so you know, the official terms and conditions of that prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Scroll to the bottom and you'll find the link with all the details there. And with that, why don't we move along and get to the content that I cannot wait to hear. Joining us for this pre-recorded session are Scott Crawford with 451 Research, Gregor Stewart, VP of Artificial Intelligence with SentinelOne, and Mike McGrail, Senior Engineering Manager with SentinelOne. Let's hear what they have to teach us now about generative AI. Hey, I got through it 2 or 3 times without screwing it up, so I'm feeling pretty good about that. Let's go listen in right now, folks.
Thank you, sir. I'll just jump right in here. So I'm Scott Crawford, Research Director for the Information Security Channel at 451 Research, part of S&P Global Market Intelligence. And yeah, this is, we've been covering trends in security operations for really some time as one of our primary coverage areas here at 451. And as part of that coverage, we do regular survey research of security practitioners. And when it comes to surveying security operations pros, one of the questions that we've been asking them year over year is we're trying to find a way to get at what they can't get to in the course of a normal day. In other words, not just how well is the technology serving them, but what are they faced with in terms of threat detection, let alone response? What are they pulling in as far as data from the environment, and how's it working for them? So we put this in a question as far as on a typical day, and we let them, characterize that as they wish. But on a typical day, how many security alerts are they unable to investigate in that typical day? We ask them as a percentage of those events. And we average that. Year over year, it's been creeping up, but this year it actually went over 50% in 2 different dimensions. One is that more than 50% of our survey respondents cannot respond to or investigate more than 50% of the security alerts that they receive in a typical day. Now, this is very noteworthy as far as both of those numbers going over 50%. And we drill into this a bit to ask them about some of the issues that they're facing. And they tell us a lot of things. So some of it is just the nature of changing IT, the fact that so many resources are moving to the cloud. Cloud assets throw off a lot of data. And if you add to that an increasingly expanding and diverse attack surface, particularly when you start to incorporate things like operational technologies and venues that might be difficult to get to in terms of telemetry and monitoring, let alone threat detection and response, that really adds to what they have to deal with on a typical day. And there's a lot of issues with legacy techniques as well, too, as far as threat detection and response goes in particular. A lot of their legacy techniques, a lot of their storage approaches to storage of this data, movement and storage of this data, can't keep up with all these demands. Other issues that they tell us, the cost of the storage may be prohibitive, and it may not be best fitted to, a variety of use cases that they have to deal with in a typical organization. I mean, threat detection and response has to be as close to real time as it possibly can. It also has to have an acceptable signal to noise ratio, if you will. So they need to minimize not only false positives, but false negatives as well. So optimizing their legacy investment poses a challenge for a lot of organizations. And in any event, a lot of legacy techniques may not be well adapted to modern realities. What we see in terms of what people are deploying for threat detection and response is taking greater advantage of cloud native technology, advances in serverless based functionality, API based integration. And they're just struggling with this in a lot of organizations. So this has been very noteworthy for us to see, particularly given some recent trends that we've seen in the space around, we've seen some shakeup in the market for security information and event management, just to name one. But these are a lot of things that we've been seeing driving practitioners over the course of the last, not just the last year, but the last year plus. And I'm sure, Gregor, I see you nodding your head at some of these figures here. I'm sure we're not alone in seeing this.
No, I think infrastructure in particular has become more complex and multi, if you like, venue. And because people want to achieve greater things, infrastructure as code, et cetera, breeds complexity. And as you said, more and more detection, telemetry being thrown at the same number of people, essentially, right? So this wonderful ability for us to now manage multiple global instantiations of products and so on with very complex infrastructures also now throws a huge amount of information at the same number of people. And as we increased our fidelity of detection and breadth of detection, we now have many more alerts. It's not just telemetry. It's we're getting better at finding the subtle signs sooner. But this causes there to be a large body of information for these people to go through. So.
Yep, indeed. Mike, I see you nodding your head as well too.
Yeah, Scott, thanks for this. Over the years, from an analyst perspective, we've always referred to this as alert fatigue. However, with these numbers that you're showing here, we're well past fatigue, right? This is simply unsustainable, and it puts us all, I think, from an organizational perspective, at risk because simply analysts are falling so far behind now.
Yeah, and it's not even just the people problem either. I mean, absolutely. People do have to be involved. I mean, one of the things we can't get away from is that cybersecurity is fundamentally a human issue in the first place. We're talking about people dealing with human motivations and human creativity to achieve an objective really on both sides. And it bears a lot more resemblance to gamesmanship or military strategy, if you will, than a lot of other aspects of software and technology. But people clearly need help. I mean, this is an alarming number for us to see it should be for any organization, really.
What it represents is an asymmetry, really, right? In the effort, it's a lot easier to generate new detection, to generate new telemetry than it is to help people deal with it, right? And that's why we're at this stage. These things are differentially harder to do, right? So,
right. There's also an issue with the technology, though, as well, too. So one of the things, I mentioned about legacy techniques, one of the issues, a couple of issues we've seen around legacy approaches. One of them is that for the ones that have to rely on telemetry being relayed to an analytic functionality, there may be some implied latency to that. Whereas more recent techniques that we've seen, particularly around threat detection and response, certainly in the endpoint, to some extent in the network as well, too. That also couples telemetry obtained directly from the source with some analytic functionality at the source as well, too. You compare that to legacy techniques where the correlations and the alert raising may not occur until the data has actually been fielded and centralized normalized and then analyzed, that introduces some issues for organizations as well. And you've been seeing, I'm sure, a lot of response to technological innovation at the point of telemetry and making decisions and taking action at the point where the threat is encountered over the last several years.
In some ways, I wish there were more of that. I think one of the deficiencies that we see is too little intelligence at the edge, at the endpoint, at the detection end. What you said in some ways is, I think more often people are still shipping things up and detecting after the fact than they are right at the endpoint or at point of source, right? If you like, I think there's a lot more to be done there, and also the technologies that have just become current, LLMs and so on, have a lot to contribute there, especially as they mature.
Right. We've been seeing changes in architectural approach as well, too. In fact, whereas in the past we'd seen a lot of vendors delivering a fully integrated stack of technology, and when I say fully integrated, what I really should say is vertically integrated, if you will, meaning that they're providing everything up to a very large degree. There's some issues that organizations run into that when it comes to outcomes, when they're looking for specific outcomes, when they're looking for analytic and response tools that are fitted to purpose or fitted to the specific practitioner. There's a difference between a SOC analyst and someone to whom threat investigation is escalated. There's a difference between the threat hunter and someone who's responding to threats in the operational environment in as close to real time as possible. There's the issues of connecting the telemetry with those experiences for the specific use case. And as clearly we're suggesting in the title of this session here, there's certainly a need for automation. We've seen a lot of automation appear over the last several years around the theme of security response. But generative AI poses an additional advantage beyond that, an additional capability beyond that. If you would elaborate for us, to the extent to which you see Purple AI moving in this direction, not only just to alleviate people, but to better put together outcomes rather than just a technology stack for practitioners.
So if you like, it's great that you've got this stack here because we can illustrate at least 3 pieces, right, that fit together. So one of them is the sources and the if you like, the data fabric as you've written it here, right? It's like, so it used to be that you now have to write an adapter, right, for each of these sources. And it was very brittle to changes. And a lot of what was put on top of it in terms of automation or detection, et cetera, relied upon that remaining current. So one area in which we've seen advancement is the speed with which you can keep pace with changes, right, in say APIs or data structures and so on. And you can see this in a kind of, I ask an LLM to make a call, right, to an API, and it knows what the API is today, right, and it's able to retrieve the information I need, the intent, rather than issue the call that worked yesterday and get back the wrong information, right? And so you can go from schemas, API specifications to the correct ingest, right, in ways that were a lot faster. You can onboard sources more quickly. Now this goes to the, hey, we're adding more stuff, right? But also at ingest time, you can do some essentially inference, right? So what you can bring in is already more enriched, right? Now this would be great, if you're on a legacy platform where if you issue a query over even modest amounts of data, it might take you 30 minutes to get a response, right? Certainly not a conversational cadence, right? So in addition to being able to bring in more information in a more flexible way, you have to have the speed, you have to have the capacity, right? And we've seen that, prior sets of tools didn't have that, and so couldn't accommodate. So a security-specific data store, data fabric needs to have very high capacity and access speed, and not so for other uses, for example, like backward-looking performance analysis, right? Or root cause analysis for things, for essentially efficiency capabilities, right? And then the second piece that sits on top there is workflows where you would have to query the information in this data fabric. Now that it's come in and it's more enriched and so on, you still have to, essentially cast your thoughts into the idiom of that fabric. And the thing that we've managed to do pretty well with Purple is to remove that need for knowledge. Now you can couch your security question as you would, to a colleague, and we will unfold that into a set of queries, and combine the knowledge required, right, to make that work. So at least three things there. One, more flexible, ingest of information, robust to change in a way that we haven't had, and more enriched. Second, the kind of speed and capacity that's required, a very tough assignment, for any data storage platform, any data fabric. And thirdly, this reduction in the need to know anything about what goes on beneath, right, and can just focus on security intent, if you like.
Mike, you've seen that from the practitioner point of view as well, too, as far as speed to outcomes, speed to specific results. One of our data points here, we'll come back to this. Whoops, I skipped something in our previous slide, but I just wanted to pop this real quickly. We asked, in the same survey, we asked security practitioners what they do expect there to be impact from generative AI on security operations. So this isn't all just hype. I mean, yes, we've been talking a lot about this in the industry, but there has to be some, certainly some expected outcomes. And I think you're seeing that in your body of professionals that are adopting. What are some of the experiences? What are they telling you about some of the advantages that they're seeing from what they're getting so far?
Yeah, I mean, Scott and Gregor, this is so pointed and really good conversation. And I think even just the terminology, large language model, I mean, we think about the fact that these are trained on very large volumes of data, right? We don't call them small language models. If we discard or drop 50% or 75 or 90%, Gregor, imagine your team's trying to work on this with an infinitesimally small subset of data there, rather than what's available. That is the actuality of what security practitioners have been doing, because legacy platforms just simply cannot handle shipping these large volumes of data that have this gold from a security perspective of everything that users are doing, right? And attempted threats and breaches are being caught at the endpoint, but the telemetry behind them and able to do those investigations, Gregor, that you alluded to earlier, we need that data. And so to have a platform that holds those and then allows analysts to hunt, interrogate, investigate, looking at the bottom right, those telemetry sources, it's almost like you could make that a massive box, right? And then a lot of times it's easier to sort of ingest or put in other smaller volumes of data, but we have this foundation already in place. And that unlocks everything that we're talking about. And then clearly, of course, as we moved into generative AI and training large language models, we have all of this data. So from an architectural perspective, it feels so boring at times to talk about architecture, but it really is so fundamental to unlocking these use cases and ultimately driving these outcomes from an analyst perspective that we're talking about. And very pointedly, Scott, to answer that question, it was way too much talking for me to say what's magical is that we actually have the ability to hunt and interrogate and investigate all of this data that we simply never had before.
There's, speaking of outcomes, when we were discussing this a few days ago, this was kind of the direction that we were getting to. Like you were saying, it's one thing to talk about architecture. It's one thing to be familiar with the makeup of an architecture that's needed to support this, but this is really the outcome that we're trying to get to. I should say this is part of the outcome we're trying to get to, where we're getting not just analysts, but effective response, including automation, as close to the source in both time and space, if you will, getting as close to telemetry from the source and taking action as close to the source as possible to mitigate impact, to speed response. So really, it's cutting through some of the things that would complicate a comprehension, the effectiveness of doing this for practitioners, rather. Getting to this point where we're drawing practitioners and response closer to the source, closer to the incident at the time of, for that particular use case. And then for the historical data as well, too, having that large body of historical data. But it doesn't all require necessarily the same architecture, and practitioners don't necessarily need to know that. They do need to have storage. They do need to have data management that's adapted to near real time for near real time threat detection. They do need to have sources that are adapted for things like investigation and threat hunting and so on. But that kind of begs a question. So, this is a very high level diagram here. What about the need for maturity in the environment and building that, helping organizations build that? What are you seeing as far as Is there any way you could characterize generally our organizations reaching some sort of a, I don't want to say hybrid, because that probably sends the wrong message, but a blend of techniques? Or are they gravitating towards, is there a better way to approach this? Should we be looking at vendors that put this together for us? What's been your experience with that?
Yeah, and from my side, that's a really good question, Scott. And we kind of see both, right? In full transparency, we speak to organizations where we would like to get there. We're not quite sure how to operationalize that, right? We need someone to help and guide and point us and say, can you show me how that's going to up level my analysts? It's going to lead us to a better state, but also can I be sure? Can I have my faith, trust, and confidence in you, vendor? That you're architecturally sound, that everything you're showing me is secure, and I don't have yet more work on top of it I can't already manage to go back and do a fine-tooth comb review of your architecture, and do I have any concerns around data egress or infiltration or exfiltration and things like that, right? So from a leadership perspective, as you know, going forth and proving this out for customers, I think that's first and foremost the largest thing. On the flip side, right, we talk to clearly very large organizations that are not short of brilliant minds. I have a lot of very, very strong people and in deep technology and prowess. And it's more working as I would say as a partner, right? So these are your ideas. These are the things that you're looking to prove out. These are your hypotheses. And we're pretty well aligned, because typically I think when they're forward thinking, we're sort of in that same ballpark of where we're headed and what we're looking at. So it's more of a, traditionally you think of like a customer advisory board or a partnership or something like that. So that helps. We kind of see both of those.
Mm-hmm.
I think an interesting aspect of this current round of technology is the degree to which it's compatible with increasing maturity, as opposed to prior rounds, let's say. So if you were to look at SOAR, right, we'd have to adopt now a low code, no code. It's a new tool. It's a new paradigm. I now have to think in terms of 3 football fields ahead, if you like, right, which things are going to be repeated, etc., and actually spend more time doing that and less time becoming mature in your security practices. So it's actually diverging in many ways. And so the most mature organizations are going to take very carefully, like, the prospect of adding tooling. In this instance, right, you're saying this already comes out of your system, and you would already be writing a summary. Here's a draft of a summary, for example, just to take the simplest use case. You're saying, you're not having to really learn anything new. It's there. Right, now you can work on it. Sure, there are subtle, as Mike was maybe implying there are subtle questions about, is it hallucinating, is it correct, etc. Those I think we can address, but the compatibility with existing human systems. Hang on a second. It's my son calling me.
There's one now.
He doesn't know.
It's an alert.
Sorry. So. But the degree to which it's compatible with increasing maturity, right? Because it sits quite nicely with those with existing practices, as opposed to having you work in a different way, right? And we gave one example there of summaries, but there are many others, right? In the use of these techniques, right? At time.
So the ability to add to the current investment and augment it where necessary, that's pretty substantial. I mean, some of the activity we've seen in the market over the last few weeks has been pretty blatantly targeted at, frankly, just acquiring new customers and acquiring new accounts. And that reflects one of the things that we've seen in the market, is that these investments do tend to be fairly sticky for a number of reasons, not least because security teams do have to make a substantial investment in not only learning, but optimizing the platform. A lot of times when it's a query-based sort of approach to deriving intelligence from the data that they're gathering, there's a lot that practitioners have to know in detail about how to structure a query, for one thing. This is something that LLMs can very much be assisted with, but that's always posed something of a roadblock to transitioning from one platform to another. And then the other issue that we see organizations running into, we talk about as vendor consolidation, but really what this kind of amounts to is, can we reduce this as close to one as possible? I mean, not even the security operations domain. So take authentication, for example. Everybody is now running into the use case. I mean, we've seen a lot in the last several days about multi-factor authentication. But a lot of organizations, you have to use multiple authenticators, multiple authenticator applications, depending on what the provider of the given service is. Can we please get this down to 1? That becomes a very common request among organizations. But this is functionality that can be added to the existing investment to optimize it. I take it that's what you're seeing. That's pretty much what you've alluded to, Mike, when you were talking about, adoption in your comments. But is it leading to further adoption of additional new technologies or making that easier for organizations?
I can give one very, very pointed example here, right? I was working, in fact, last week with a customer that had, I think, what we would all consider to be a traditional and dare I say, legacy SIEM platform, right? And it was basically, the conversation was around, here's my list of static detections that these run on a cron schedule. So they just run over and over and ask the same question. And here's my list. And can you reproduce these? And, Scott, to your point, it's like, well, yes, we could absolutely, try to dissect those. And what are the syntactical queries? And I can go back and say, well, here's, if you say potato, this says potato, right? That whole mantra. Or better yet, what's the actual question that you're asking? Is it something like, show me an anomalous number of events from a host? Awesome. So I legitimately took those questions that they were, punched them into Purple AI as is in English, and got a syntactical query of how we would say potato, potato as a response, and then showed those back and said, here's how SentinelOne looks at this. We are more interested in the actual question, your use case that you're asking, and LLMs and all of the magic that Gregor's team is building behind the scenes is going to do that hard work for us. But we're interested in up-leveling your stock, and here's how we do it. And that went as well as you would think it was, right? That's just a change of a practitioner's mindset where we've been so focused. Gregor, earlier when you mentioned like building these connectors, right? Like from a very hands-on keyboard technical lens, sometimes we've been so deep in the weeds for so long, the old mantra of you can't see the forest for the trees, but now we're able to take a step back and look at the bigger picture and say, some of this has technologically been solved, right? So how do we just up-level?
So 2 things came to mind there as you guys were talking to gloss, right? So the first one is that this technology is making it possible for people to interact more effectively, right? In that if you're interacting with the system in natural language and you're getting responses, and then those are being interpreted in natural language that allow you to interact with them more easily, right? And make your workflow more straightforward. Now you have more time to interact with others, right? And you have artifacts that you can interact over. So one of the things that we were surprised by essentially was the popularity of what we thought was a fairly straightforward feature of notebooks, right? So a bit like a chat, but much more decorated, much more like a data science notebook. And in fact, most of security work really looks an awful lot like data science work, right? You're posing tests, and the answer to the results of those tests tell you whether or not you have a breach or otherwise, right? So the idea here is now have these artifacts that we can trade, we can learn from one another, we can extend practice, and so on. And that was actually one of the original design intents of it, but we were surprised as to how important that was for people. Second piece is though that you going back to your one vendor to rule them all kind of thing, with all the bad implications that has, right? It's like because it's going to be that nothing good comes of that. But to talk about consolidation, you might think that this era makes our platform less valuable because I can move between different platforms. There may be 3 that are as capable, and so on. Why would I stick with anyone if I have an LLM translating for me between these different platform elements? I can just stay with that. But the degree of connectedness or coupling between these elements, to deliver a workflow which is satisfying and useful and composes well with the existing workflow that you have, so it allows you to pick it up and get benefits without taking a year's worth of reduction in maturity because you're adopting a new tool. That's actually where the win will come. So when we're even looking at competitors and ourselves, we're asking who's building the best workflow, not who has the most LLM or who has the absolute fastest underlying data platform. It's how are these elements fused together to deliver a security enhancing experience. And I think that's what will make someone come to you and start buying other elements, from you, as opposed to, just being the fastest or most capacious or, most language model-y, if you like.
Yeah, you made an allusion to platforms are a little bit in a point of view on that, and something I had said at one point, or we may have said to each other. about the One Ring thing. We don't see that. We see the platform landscape itself, as I've characterized it, being somewhat lumpy. There are domains around which a lot of these areas center, but there isn't, nor do we expect anytime soon there will be one to rule them all. There has to be some interaction between them. I gave an example, actually, through authentication. They do have to speak to each other to a pretty significant degree, but this is enabling technology. We certainly see that. I'm kind of curious, and maybe keep an eye on the clock. Maybe we should wrap up our thoughts with this, but what are practitioners telling you is on their wish list for greater automation, the incorporation of more advanced AI, and what they want to see in SecOps? What are they telling you that we really haven't heard so much yet in the open market?
I think from my side in the field, I'll field that first, Gregor, and certainly I'm continually excited to see what's being built to service these. The feedback loop is real, and that's phenomenal. I think the biggest thing is just moving into responses, right? Automation. So it's one thing to be on the front end and be able to interrogate and form hypotheses and derive insights and things like that. But from a security analyst perspective, it's turned into, how can I be even more proactive, so maybe that I don't have to ask the question myself, and then B, whether that hypothesis or that investigation is generated from myself or autonomously or whatever that looks like, can we do things to take proactive response, and then let our analysts dive into that and either make informed decisions to drive those forth, or assuage the outcomes or modify how those are. Or can we have something go so far and then pause and let our analysts take it from there? And those have been, I would say, the biggest asks. Or did you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we have three things that we can do right in the next little while. The first one is we can help you get certain kinds of work done. That's assistant, right? We can figure out which work you really should do, right? What we call triage, right? And that's actually 50% of the work. It's figuring out which things are of import to work on. Right. And the third one is, can you do some of that work for me? Some of the work I would do, right? Some of the work we would naturally do for these items, right? And I think we can do something for all three of those in the next year. More importantly, though, is this learning element. You mentioned feedback, and Scott. So when I hear from customers and they say, outside of these things that we've just described, right, auto investigation, say what they want is for the system to learn from them, but also from the community. Right. So a key aspect of our approach going forward is, what can we learn from the aggregate of action across all of our customer base, as well as the other sources of information that we have, and from this customer's practice. So to give you a concrete example, I've seen an alert like this 3,000 times before. It's very like something I've seen before. I action it 90% of the time this way, and we say, this is what was different in the cases where you actioned it differently. Now a person is in a very good place, right, to decide whether or not it should be actioned in the same way or otherwise, or to set off an automation with conditions, and so on and so forth, right? So the learn from me and learn things for me from the community is a very strong kind of underlying desire from the customer base.
Great. It's a great place probably to put a pause on this and look forward to what's coming in the not too distant future. So thank you both very much for the conversation. And Michael, I think we'll probably put it back over to you.
Great. So I think we heard a lot about what the industry is doing from an AI perspective. We know that, and Gregor put it very well, there's an asymmetry right now between the amount of work we have to do to protect our environment and the amount of effort an adversary has to break in, right? And until we can create this imbalance of work between those two, we will always be at a disadvantage. And I think some of the things that were talked about here make a lot of sense for today's security analyst. Alert fatigue is real, but I think the study that we just saw from Scott shows the true impact of what that means downstream in terms of the number of untriaged and uninvestigated threats. We did a study a few years back that claimed that 25% of all threats went untriaged. That was 4 years ago. So your metrics today, Scott, only amplify that message. What I also found interesting was 25% of those 25% were critical. That means that 1/16 of all critical events never had eyes on glass. That is a huge problem for us in terms of maintaining and developing our improved security posture. So as we look out into the future, Gregor kind of highlighted a number of areas where we are doing a tremendous effort to put the tools of AI into the hands of security practitioners as a force multiplier to the resources that we have in those roles. I don't expect that AI will replace anyone's job anytime soon. It will certainly make those jobs easier to do, make them more efficient in their practice of doing them. And it will start exposing, I think, higher level capabilities and concepts to lower tier SOC analysts that didn't have that opportunity before, up-leveling the skill set of our SOC team. So this was incredibly exciting. I'm glad everyone stuck around for this session. We look forward to seeing you in the next session. So thank you for attending.
Well, that was certainly enlightening, exactly what I was hoping to get there. I think one of the most important things that was said was right near the end, actually, that they do not foresee AI taking people's jobs. And for the most part, I think that's going to be accurate. AI will, of course, there will be jobs lost here and there, but there will also be jobs created, I think, because of how it boosts companies and their bottom lines in a lot of cases. So I think the fallout will not be as dramatic as folks think, and there will be jobs created maybe that people aren't expecting. In any event, that was just a fantastic session. Was filled with nuggets of information that I think we all can use and learn from. So want to thank everyone for joining us today. Before we wrap up, though, and I let you go, we do need to give away the Amazon gift card. As I said up top, you do have to be present for the entire event to be eligible to win the gift card at all Actual Tech Media events. And the winner of the gift card for today's event is Maxwell Jays from Illinois. Congratulations, Maxwell. Sit tight, and we will be in touch to get you your card. And with that, folks, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank SentinelOne for making this event possible today. Thank you, attendees, for being here, for your interest in this topic, for the questions you ask, and another reminder that all those who ask questions will be hearing from SentinelOne, so have no fear about that. It's been a delight for me to be here with you, folks. I can't wait to see you in the next event. Have a great day, and stay cool, everyone.